Hey, I'm Hashim, welcome back. Thanks for joining on this one. If you've been watching the channel for a bit, you know that I recently visited Vietnam for the first time. And after starting in Ho Chi Minh City and then heading up north to Hanoi for a couple of days, it was time for us to head even further north where we'd be spending the biggest chunk of our time. So in turn, this video will be a little bit chunkier than those last two, which were just street process videos from those two main cities. But the plan was to head to Hà Giang by sleeper bus, where Sarah and I were joined by our friend Phom. We'd be doing the popular Hà Giang Loop by motorbike, staying in a different place each night and taking in what the far north had to offer. And of course, getting some photos along the way. We did the loop on our own as opposed to being guided or with a tour group. And there's a certain freedom to just being out on the road, being able to stop wherever and whenever you like. The main camera I'd be using was my Leica M-A as usual. I also had the Canon R6 for photos and video, and the Olympus XZ1 on hand. Once we eventually arrived in Hà Giang, we spent a night at a great place called An's Homestay, which I'd highly recommend if you're planning your own trip there. After some great home-cooked food and a good night's sleep, we packed a few days worth of gear and left most of our luggage behind at the homestay to collect it once we returned. Everyone does this loop at a different pace, but we chose to do it in 3 days. We headed to the motorbike rental place to get set up. It's worth mentioning that this tour is extremely popular, but the time of the year that we chose, it was apparently on the quieter side. Phom rides a motorbike back in Australia and went with a big dirt bike, while Sarah and I went with the little Honda blades that you'll see everywhere in Vietnam. I finished the last few shots on a roll of HP5 400 that I had loaded, and then swapped it for some Kentmere 400. After a really long wait at the rental place, we finally loaded our bikes, got fueled up, and started our long drive to the first stop, Đồng Văn. The weather was a bit gloomy, and this would be our longest leg, so we tried not to make too many stops. The next parts were meant to be the most scenic. We heard this from some other people we'd met who'd just done the tour and had to make up for some lost time anyway. It was still the tail end of the Lunar New Year, so we came across some interesting festivals held by the locals. I quite liked this candid portrait of the guy on the horse. The relaxed pose, the cowboy hat, and the general demeanor brought it all together. Throughout this drive, we already grew to appreciate the amazing scenery and what was yet to come. We arrived at our first overnight stay in Đồng Văn, a beautiful area where the main city is surrounded by these rugged mountains. Another good night's sleep later, and it was time to head off again. But shortly after stopping for food, I found out I had a flat tire. So a quick stop by a nearby repair place for a new tube, and we were on the road again. The second day's plan was to head to Dày Du Già, and this drive was meant to be one of the best. We heard great things from a couple of American visitors we met back at the first hostel. It's also where there was a great side quest route called the Sky Path, a narrow path that cuts down the mountains and away from the main road. We got to the starting point of the Sky Path and took a little break. I walked around here to get some more photos of the various activity and scenery. I reached the end of that roll and loaded some Kodak Vision 2 250D from Mr. Negative. This stock was cold stored since 2008 and had some great colors, similar to what I love about the newer Kodak Vision 3 equivalent. It also has the remjet layer intact, so there's little to no halation. More than ever, I think shooting cinema film is a great alternative to options like Portra and can be considerably cheaper. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know I'm a big fan and have spoken a lot about this topic in the past. I always like to have a bulk roll of Kodak Vision on hand, but I also enjoy shooting pre-packaged rolls and the hard to find stocks like this Vision 2 or Fuji's Eterna. If you're also interested in trying something different, check out the Melbourne-based Mr. Negative for more. I saw this rider who had a great outfit on, so I had to ask for a portrait. I had him stand where I could use the mountains behind him to create a subtle frame and complement the colors of his camo fatigues. But that colorful scarf really made the difference in my opinion. It was time to continue the ride and head down through the Sky Path. This was a big highlight of the trip, and personally one of the most scenic and fun experiences that I've ever had. It's a bit risky and dangerous though, which has to be accepted when it comes to doing anything like this. There were a few photo opportunities on the way down, and it's great to be able to just ride and stop to grab shots whenever you like. Looking back at this footage now, I wish I'd taken more photos, but I was probably just having so much fun enjoying the ride and trying not to get too distracted and end up in a ditch. The path eventually connected back to a normal road and the drive continued. It's pretty amazing to look back and see how varied the loop really was, especially when cutting up the footage later on in editing. I'll show you a little montage of the photos that I took along this part of the drive. We got to the next accommodation called 2-Day Village, which was tucked away from everything and surrounded by great views. This was probably our favourite accommodation, and we stayed in one of these great bungalows that they had. The place was well kept and the staff was super friendly, the food was good. I'll put this one in the video description as well. The next morning we woke up to find that it had been raining overnight, so it was a bit muddy out there. There were little breaks of sunlight, but more showers were predicted. We had breakfast, packed up, and I took a few shots around the village. Some subtle light was breaking through onto some of the mountains in the background, which I think looked really nice on the Kodak Vision film. We hit the muddy pathway out of the village to get back to the main road.
Slippery, this mud.
And slippery it was, but kind of fun to be honest. Once we got out of the village, we met Fom at a nearby mechanic. His rental bike had been giving him issues with a slipping clutch from the very beginning, especially on the uphills, which was a large portion of the drive. So he'd organised for the repair to be covered by the rental place, and luckily there was a nearby workshop where it was a fairly quick and easy job. It was as good as new again, so we continued the drive back to our starting point in Hà Giang. This section of the loop was also fantastic, with varied scenery, weather, roadside stops, uphills, downhills. I'll save you the talking and just let you see another montage from this third and final day of our loop. made it back to Hà Giang and returned the bikes. Back at An's homestay, we relaxed, repacked, and prepared to catch another sleeper bus to Sapa this time, where we'd spend the next part of our trip in an area called Đồng Văn village, outside of the main city. I finished up the last shot in the roll of Kodak 250D and loaded up some Kentmere 100. The sleeper bus took us to Sapa, where we then took a taxi to ride up to our homestay up through the clouds and mist. The main town is quite nice, but also busy and touristy, so I think it was a nice choice staying up in the village. This homestay was a bit higher up in the mountains, and the remaining mist made for a great atmosphere, especially up at nighttime. The next morning, I got up and went for a walk to the main part of the village. Kentmere Pan 100 is a great looking black and white film, and I'm really starting to enjoy the results and value that I get from the Kentmere Pan films. I had a chat with a guy from Singapore who'd been touring Vietnam for a long while with his dog. I got a portrait of him and grabbed a coffee on my walk back up to the homestay. The plan was to rent some bikes again so we could explore more of Sapa and the surrounding areas. So this afternoon, we'd hit the main town and check out this market. It was the weekend, the sun was out, and there was plenty of activity, so it would be a good chance for some proper street photography. In the end, I shot enough to make a whole POV street photography episode, but thought it would be better to just integrate it into this longer video. I was using the Zeiss 35mm lens and started finding shots as soon as we hit the market. Beautiful light at the end of the afternoon. I just got through a roll of Kentmere 100 that you would have seen the shots from, and I am now switching to 400 since the light is dipping and I want a little bit more depth of field. But it's been great fun so far. I've even taken some shots on the little Olympus XZ1 again, because I just like having that for color, little spontaneous snaps, whereas my main focus is black and white with the 35mm lens. So yeah, let's keep shooting. So I'm back here where I was earlier, and it looks like they're packing up. There's still a fair bit happening. Just the activity that all the packing up creates makes it worth another lap through, I think. Try and set up this shot to get the leading lines of the pipes. So we drove past this interesting open square earlier, and I want to try and head there before the light goes. I'm gonna have to jump on the bike for this one. Cool, so this is the one I was talking about. Just all this open area. And now I'm just setting up a shot for this bus, for this guy in the green to run past, just to add some extra dimension. Now we actually have this kid, which will add another element. Hopefully the three elements interact and enter the shot. All right, here we go. Not quite. That's all right, because the bus alone wasn't really enough, I think, for the shot. But yeah, I think I'll move on from this area. Really like this silhouette of the mountain range there. I need some element in the foreground. Maybe this guy. Damn it, too slow. So with the good street photography fix out of the way, the next day would mostly be spent driving around and exploring the area. We had some good food, checked out some of the local scenery and hotspots. This included a drive up to a viewpoint called Heaven's Gate, which was really windy, to the point where it was actually quite hard to drive through some parts without proper goggles. Sarah had some spare sunglasses that I used, but luckily the way back down was much better anyway, and the light was really starting to get nice. After driving through town and exploring a little bit more, the light was fading and it would soon be time to return the bikes. Another good night's rest and we'd be back on the road again the next morning. Yet another long bus trip, this time back to Hanoi. These sleeper buses make rest stops along the way, and one stop along this leg offered some interesting scenes that I thought would work well on colour. Since I had Kentmere in the Leica, I decided to shoot with the Canon R6. Time was limited since this rest stop would only be about 20 minutes. It was already starting to feel a lot warmer as we were heading south and downhill, especially in contrast to the weather during our first leg in Hanoi. But a few more shots later, we loaded up on snacks and continued the ride. Back in Hanoi, I would do a few little photo walks and explore more of the city. I also did some night exposures on digital, partly inspired by the work of Greg Girard, whose photo book from Hanoi I'd been looking at before the trip. It was a nice way to round out the trip in Vietnam and warm up for the next leg, which would be in Japan. If you've seen my previous video on the channel, you'll know that I did a fair bit of night photography over in Japan. I know the timelines might seem confusing given that this video is coming out later, but there are certain things to consider and work around when it comes to shooting film, waiting for scans to get back from different parts of the trip, and just trying to keep the content flowing on the channel. But regardless, this hopefully gave you a good taste of the north part of Vietnam and the rather limited portion that we were able to experience in our short time. I feel like we only scraped the surface, but that's often the case when visiting any new country. Given the 12 days we spent there, I think we had quite a full experience. All in all, I'd recommend Vietnam as a first-time visitor, whether it's for the experiences, the culture, the scenery and photography, or something else. I think you can't go wrong. Thankfully, Sarah had been integral in planning out the great itinerary that we had, which was a key element in our experience. And if you're game to do the Hà Giang Loop, I think that alone is an experience worth a trip in itself. So I guess that brings me to the end of this video and the Vietnam chapter from this trip. Next, Sarah and I would be heading to Japan, from where I've already shared most of the content that I've managed to produce there. But the trip wasn't over after Japan, since we'd be heading to Bangladesh afterwards. And with Dhaka being one of my favorite cities for street photography, I have plenty of stuff still coming up from there. Hope you enjoyed coming along for this one, and thanks for making it all the way here to the end. I'll see you next time.